for taking the time to log on and attend this morning's webinar. My name is Emily Cornelius. I am the Marketing and Communications Coordinator here at Vigorate. And before I pass over the webinar to today's presenters, I just want to take a second to introduce where you can ask questions. So if you want to, you can either ask on the GoToWebinar on the side of your screen, or you can also tweet us at Vigorate Digital, and don't forget the hashtag @DemonstrateWebinar. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. Any questions that don't get answered today, we will be answering on our Vigorate Digital LinkedIn page later today, so you can always check back there for any questions that didn't get answered during the webinar. So before we do get into the responsive design talk, I just want to briefly mention our next webinar in the Demonstrate series. It will take place on April 24th at 11 a.m. This webinar will be all about data. So we will be bringing in experts from Massive Insights to speak on how to gain insights into data to positively impact engagement, response, and ultimately revenue. For more information about this upcoming webinar, you can register for our Demonstrate webinar notifications on our website at vigoratedigital.com. Okay, so today we are welcoming Whitney Bloom and Derek Rodney as our responsive design connoisseurs. Whitney has been with Vigorate for almost 2 years now in our account management department. As the first line of contact with our clients, Whitney was one of the first to understand the key role that mobile is playing in our line of work. She has been working with clients to build responsive emails for quite some time now, and has experienced all of the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with it. And Derek is a front-end developer here at Vigorate. He is part of the production team who have actually been building and deploying these responsive emails and websites for our clients. So without further ado, I will pass the torch over to Whitney, who will be kicking things off.
Thanks, Emily, and hello, everyone. So as an account coordinator here at a digital company, I really had to learn and understand responsive design fairly quickly. It was a must. So it happened fast. I learned through a lot of trial and error. Definitely wasn't glamorous, and at times it was extremely frustrating, but a lot of our clients here were rushing to jump on the trend. It seems that everybody wants their digital content developed for multi-screen, so I really had to navigate through the online literature, and now I kind of want to share with you the facts, the implementation process, the generally accepted best practices, and so forth. So please note throughout this webinar, I'm going to use the word multi-screen a lot. This discussion really goes beyond mobile. So you have to remember that this conversation is about the development for multi-screen, so mobile, yes, but also notebooks and tablets and desktops and so forth. Before we go any further, I want to highlight that this webinar will be focusing on responsive design, but that's not the only option for developing for multi-screens. Fluid and scalable are other directions you may want to take, but I believe responsive design is the best fit for many online initiatives, whether it be email or web. So now we're going to just jump right into it and get into the nitty-gritty of planning and designing and implementing responsive design. But before that, I think it's really important to give you some context and have you understand how responsive design came to be and why now it seems to be more important than ever to design with it in mind. So well before the average consumer was accessing the internet from a cell phone or a tablet, the majority of the web content was served up by a technology called wireless application protocol. This was in the dark ages, so you don't really need to know about it, and you definitely don't need to write it down, but just good to know where we're coming from. So if we fast forward a couple years, devices like the Nokia Simians, Blackberries, and Palms, they're all starting to come online and have the ability to surf the web. It's exciting, but there lies a major issue. The issue is that browsers on these devices were severely limited in terms of CSS, and JavaScript support, standards compatibility, and accessible bandwidth. Because of these limitations, developers chose to create a real stripped-down, bare basics HTML version of sites so that they were able to render on mobile devices. Then if we cut to 2007, we all know that's the initial release of the iPhone, to today where we have thousands of smartphones and tablets and billions of connected devices. Again, very exciting, but there arises another issue. All these devices meant that a lot of people were maintaining two code bases. So one for mobile, which usually lacked full functionality, and then one for desktop. Development for both of these browsers advanced and rapidly, might I add. Consumers began to expect a consistent and reliable experience across all these devices. So how do we address this issue and improve the multi-screen user experience? Well, welcome responsive design. So the main idea behind responsive design is that you, being the designer or the developer, should be able to use the same HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to serve devices with different screen sizes and resolutions. The idea is that your layout should be able to respond or be responsive depending on a number of factors. So the key technology this process relies upon is media queries. So responsive design is a series of rules built into the HTML. So the easiest way for me to explain this for the non-technical folk that are joining us today is that if screen size is X, then display Y. For some of you, you might find some of the bullet points on the screen here fairly technical, but Derek will be exploring this further to help you understand exactly how responsive design works on the front end. So I've now told you how the need for responsive design developed, but I guess the real question now for you is there a need to implement all of your online needs, whether it be web or design, web design or email design with responsive design? The answer is yes, and that's because the PC is dying and mobile is really thriving, and I'm going to prove that to you. So 2012 was an extremely unusual year in the PC market. For the first time since 2001, PC sales were actually lower than they were in the previous year. I do want to mention that the stat that I just provided you is American, but the markets really reflect similarly in Canada. So if consumers aren't buying PCs, what are they buying? Well, you and I both know they're purchasing mobile devices and tablets. This means that your digital content is being viewed on an array of mobile devices and browsers. As a result, it's my job, and perhaps your job as well, to make sure that websites and emails work equally on every device. So this one-size-fits-all approach to email design or web design is no longer good enough. So adopting responsive design is really your first step to ensuring that any and all of your online initiatives will be effective in 2013. So this picture here is courtesy of NBC, and it shows 2005 and 2013 at St. Peter's Basilica during the Pope's first address. So there's 8 years of difference here. So you can see in 2005 we only have our one friend at the bottom of the right screen with his old school flip phone. But this picture really encapsulates my point, which is that mobile and multi-screen use is here to stay, and the trend is only really going to accelerate. So the graph here is provided by Walker Sands, and it's revealing the percentage of website traffic coming from mobile devices. The key takeaway here is to note the jump from 17% in Q3 of 2012 to 23% in Q4 of 2012. So that 23% share represents an 84% hike from 12% in Q4 of 2011. Again, not Canadian stats, but it's giving you the clear picture that mobile devices are increasingly taking over our website traffic. This really tells us that mobile is the internet. And to hammer this point home, it has now been forecasted that the global number of smartphone and tablet users should surpass the worldwide number of PC users within the next year. And if that forecast bears out, that shift will not only continue, but it's going to accelerate. So now moving from the past and present, and we're going to be looking to the future of mobile. I believe that we will see the industry's rapid shift towards mobile, and it'll represent a fundamental shift in the way most of us consider the internet. According to a recent report from analyst Mary Meeker, and she's from Klein and Perkins, and she gave an address on the state of the web, she states that mobile technologies and apps will soon alter what until now have been conventional internet experiences. And some fresh off the press litmus data, they reported that in January of 2013, more than 1/3 of emails were opened on a mobile device. So that being said, what's important to remember is that fundamentally mobile devices will almost always have less screen real estate than traditional desktops, and mobile users will not have the adequate control of a mouse or a keyboard. So mobile is really forces you to focus. Mobile devices require us not only to look at the most important data and actions that we want our subscribers to use, so there just isn't enough room on a 320 by 480 pixel screen for all those unnecessary elements. You really have to prioritize. So when you and your team design for mobile first, the end result should be some sort of experience that is focused on the key tasks you want users to accomplish, without all those detours and kind of extra things that sometimes clutter today's desktop access websites. So mobile is about users being able to access content whenever, wherever. And you got to remember that searching on a mobile device is annoying. It's usually uncomfortable. And if you make the experience even more difficult for users, then you've really failed. And keep this in mind that a mouse covers about 2 pixels, while the average human finger covers close to 45 pixels. So you really need to have that top of mind when designing calls to actions and placing links close together. And speaking of CTAs, URLs are not going to die by any means, and web search will always remain the most people's primary means of finding info online. But mobile devices amplify a huge divide between mobile and web, and that is traditionally web navigation is awkward and difficult on mobile devices. So yes, web browsers are designed to enable users to jump around quickly from website to website and page to page. However, the mobile internet experience should be more of a seamless application experience and not really hopping around the internet. That said, when a user does click a link, they should land on a mobile optimized page. It should also be designed with responsive in order to have that seamless experience I mentioned. Otherwise, you'll just frustrate the end user. With that being said, my expertise kind of end here, and so I'm going to introduce Derek to you, who's our front-end developer, and he's going to take you through the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Whitney. So as she said, I'll be talking about just some of the design, layout, and best practices of responsive design, as well as the differences between websites and emails. So let's get right into it. Something that many people have yet to realize is that you can't simply take any existing email or website and try and fit it with responsive design. Typical emails are designed with the idea in mind that they'll only be viewed on a desktop computer. And because of this, they don't really cater to the responsive design practices or principles best suited for mobile users. You have to think about and design right from the get-go how your responsive content will work on all devices, what content is worth keeping and removing, what content do users need to see right away, and how much of your content will change and transform from a desktop to a phone. So while we've talked about both responsive emails and responsive websites, there's some key differences to keep in mind when developing for one over the other. We're going to go into depth over 3 of these issues, which are the limitations of media queries, user experience between email clients versus web browsers, and finally, email support for responsive design. When developing any mainstream website, you're likely going to be using CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. For those unfamiliar, this is the language you would use for the elements that are on a page to help set the look and feel of your website. So this will affect things such as colors, font sizes, spacing, basically any sort of visual effects on the website or web page. This is almost universally supported across web browsers on almost any device, but this isn't the case with email clients. CSS is rarely supported when viewing an email or when viewing emails on any device. So what does any of this have to do with responsive design? Well, media queries are a CSS function. So while there's almost no limits to how you may use media queries on a website, because the web browsers always support it, for emails we have to use a workaround. That workaround is called inline styles. Inline styles are the styling that we would normally place in a CSS file, and instead we're putting it right into our code for each element that we want to style. But you have to keep in mind that not everything that works in a CSS file will work necessarily as an inline style, hence the limitations that we face when it comes to using emails. So as I mentioned, web browsers support a lot more functionality as opposed to email clients. Where this really stands out is when it comes to viewing and testing your content. If you were to view a responsive website, for instance, if you try changing the width and height of the window, you should notice that the website will respond by adjusting the content and layout to best fit in the window. While this is a good indication of responsive design for desktops, this also provides the bonus of previewing how a website may look on a phone or a tablet, changing the width of the window to match the dimensions of another device. It's not a perfect emulation, obviously, but it helps out for testing and debugging. Unfortunately, we don't have the same luxury with email clients. If you're to view an email on an email client on a desktop, no matter how you adjust the window, nothing's going to change. This undoubtedly makes it a lot harder to test. And while there's alternatives to this, such as phone emulators or maybe viewing the page on a browser but not the actual email how it comes out in a client, they're not ideal circumstances. The only way to guarantee your results is by viewing the email on the actual device you're aiming for. And even with everything we do to provide a great responsive experience, it has to be noted that not all email clients will support responsive design. Unfortunately, there's just nothing we can do about this. Some clients simply don't accept any form of media queries or CSS, and therefore it's only going to load up the original desktop version instead. So don't be too frustrated when your email responds beautifully in, say, an iPhone or Android phone, but you don't really see your responsive design working in Gmail. This also changes from device to device, so the only way to really find out for sure is to test on the device that you're trying to design for. So here we have just some generally accepted best practices when it comes to responsive emails. We'll just go over a few of them. The layout of the email should be constrained to 1 or 2 columns max. This is to ensure that the content will stack on top of each other correctly when viewed on smaller devices. Make sure images with text are readable on all devices. So sometimes an image may become, or an image with text may become too small and too pixelated to read clearly. So you might have to have a separate image or a brand new version of that image to be loaded specifically for the mobile device. Avoid using any sort of borders, especially fancy borders that would require images to be used. This just adds up to the complication of making sure that it works properly across devices. Upscaling. Some devices, such as the iPhone, will upscale font sizes if it's too small. You just have to be aware of where this might affect the layout. So, for instance, if you have a section on an email where it has a lot of text but a small area, the iPhone may upscale the font and then it will break out that area, so the layout will be broken. Try to remove or hide any extraneous content when email is viewed on a mobile device. This will help save screen real estate, and so it only shows the important stuff on the email. As Whitney said, make sure that all links have a target area of 45 by 45 pixels. This is just so that the users on a desktop obviously have the precision of a mouse, whereas a normal person using their phone only has their finger, which is a much wider and much less inaccurate way of getting around the email. Let's skip that. Media queries are normally set for a general mobile width, so whatever we decide that advisable width should be. But they can also be set for very specific widths. So say, for example, you want an image to only load at 320 pixels, which just happens to be the width of an iPhone. You can have it for that, or the specific width of a certain tablet you might be designing for. You want to design your content with the smallest device you will support in mind so that it helps the transition between the scaling of a small device to a larger device, such as a small phone to a tablet. And once again, keep in mind that not all email clients are going to support these features anyways. So here we have an example of a recent newsletter that we sent out that uses responsive design. On the left, we have the desktop version, and on the right, we have the mobile version. And you can clearly see how it scales accordingly to each device. The desktop version uses a mix of 1 to 2 columns. There's a lot of content, but everything is clean and have this nice big image towards the top. With mobile version, you can see how everything gets stacked on top of one another, such as the 1 column, 2 column thing that we were talking about previously. And notice how, and it's really important to notice like the smaller things, the smaller subtle changes. Notice how the font at the top is much larger, just to indicate its importance. The image has been scaled accordingly so that everything is still readable and it's appropriately sized for that device. And the newsletter still keeps its general layout and design, so nothing is dramatically different or changed. It's just content has been stacked accordingly. This is what we're trying to achieve with responsive design in general. Keep the content ideal, keep the content and the look and feel ideal for users of any device, but keep the changes simple. And with that, there's still some unknowns when it comes to responsive emails. And we'll just quickly go over some of them. There's issues of when certain email clients will start supporting media queries and how well and how easily integrated it will be when they do support it. This is just one of those unknowns that we just can't simply verify at this time. Android phones use and support a wide variety of email clients, so there may be differences in what is set as the default email client, as well as any new email clients that come out in the future and how well they will support media queries. And one last issue is the current trend of phones using larger and larger screens. This may change what the ideal or specific sizes you might want to cater your responsive emails for. with that said, let's turn it over for Emily with questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. That was awesome. So we did have some questions come in. Just before I get to that, we had a couple of people asking if this webinar will be available after the webinar is over. And we do have an archived webinar page on our website, and we will be following up with an email tomorrow with the link to that. So you can always check that there. Okay. So just before I get to the questions here. Again, any questions we don't get to right now will be on our LinkedIn page later today. Okay, so the first question. When planning web or email design for responsive design, would you say the process is similar to how we traditionally design for web or email?
I'll take this one. So my answer is no, but here's why. You can't really plan for and design a responsive website or email the same way we've been creating websites and emails for years. If your goal is really to produce something that is not fixed with and serve smaller devices, then really why would you want to use a dated process that contradicts those goals? So as I mentioned earlier, prioritizing is essential, but it's not just about scaling back your content to fit on multi-screens. It's really about optimizing your content. That being said, that is exactly why the process should really begin with designing for mobile first.
Okay. So the next question, if an organization was trying to decide if they have enough internal resources to build responsive design emails, what are the things they should be looking for, or when would it be necessary to seek outside help?
Well, that's always hard to gauge. It's always going to vary depending on the size, the complexity, or the amount of emails to be sent. But something to be looking for is someone who's comfortable with responsive design in general. Simply understanding the principles and the coding methods behind responsive design is a major asset. And even if it isn't necessarily just for emails, there's a wide variety of online sources to help and teach developers for the specifics behind emails as opposed to websites. As far as seeking outside help, again, that varies, but a major factor to consider is time. Responsive emails take a lot more time. It's much more time consuming, and the learning curve with developing them is a lot longer than some companies may be able to afford. And you also have to keep compatibility in mind, because the only way to really test these devices is having the actual device. That's the only foolproof way of knowing it's going to work. So some people may not necessarily have all those devices to test on. So you want to have the resources to have as many devices so you make sure that the email works on as many devices as possible.
Okay, perfect. So we're just going to ask one more question here, just to be respectful of everyone's time. But again, any questions that don't get answered will be on our LinkedIn page later today, so you can always check back there. So we had a lot of questions come in about the different browsers adopting responsive design, and is that likely to change in the near future, or is there always going to be issues like this with responsive design?
So I'll just kind of expand on what Derek spoke about earlier. There's obviously a lot of talk about this in the World Wide Web, but there's no definitive answer. Responsive design is supported by about 70 to 80% of web browsers. The big issue is really with Internet Explorer. It just started supporting CSS3 media queries with IE9, and IE9 is the current version of IE. But previous versions still have a significantly large market share that don't support media queries. For mobile devices, the support is even higher, roughly 90% or more. But also keep in mind that CSS3 media queries are simply ignored if they aren't supported. So although I can't comment on whether all browsers will soon support responsive design, the point is that it's possible to create a web or email design that enhances when possible but degrades when it's necessary. As a result, though, there's no reason not to start experimenting with the responsive techniques on your website and emails.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Whitney and Derek. That was excellent. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Don't forget our next webinar in the Demonstrate series. It will take place on April 24th, and it's going to be around data and the role data plays in marketing. So for more information, you can check out the Demonstrate webinar notifications on our website at Vigorate Digital. So thanks very much, and have a great day.